What's up everyone, Darcblade here with the next episode in my series of Mass Effect 3 multiplayer class guides, or summaries, whatever you like to call them. Basically I'm pinpointing out the pros and cons of each class. Anyway, this episode we're going to be talking about one of my surprising favourite classes, the Human Engineer. At first I thought the Human Engineer wasn't any good, but after playing with it and sticking with it for a while, it turns out it's one of the most useful classes to any team. Now, as always, I spec my characters for silver or gold mode. Now, I might change a few things with this Human Engineer spec, but at the moment I've got it set up as follows. The combat drone has been set up for health and shields, so it can survive longer as a decoy drone. To be honest, you could change this because you can repeatedly summon the drone and thus it's doing damage for you. I've maxed out Incinerate as I feel this is one of the key abilities for the Human Engineer, specifically speccing it in to do more damage than AoE or recharge times. Overload, I feel, is probably even more a must than Incinerate, specifically making it so it takes on 100% of barriers and shields, because this means Overload will basically take out any barrier or any shield of any enemy, except for maybe the strongest ones. Of course, fitness and alliance training is a personal preference. I always, like I say, go for fitness for health and shields, because in gold challenges you need that little bit of extra health and shields to stay alive. Now for the weapons, I've used an assault rifle, the Feston I think it's called, as I love the flipping gun, and of course a backup pistol which is really lightweight. Unlike the Adept, the Human Engineer doesn't rely on really quick cooldowns, but don't weigh yourself down too much, as being able to summon multiple combat drones alongside your Overload and Incinerate is quite useful. Anyway, the combat drone here, as I said, I've set it up for a decoy drone. It basically distracts opponents, especially opponents like the Guardians here, so they will attack it and it will leave me open to attack them in the back. The only thing is, don't spawn the drone dead on an opponent, spawn it behind them. This will allow the drone to attack it from the back, thus making the enemy turn towards the drone instead of you. Now, of course, this doesn't work on every enemy. The stronger enemies tend to ignore the drone, unfortunately, but it still works like a charm on the weaker enemies. So the next ability the Human Engineer has is Incinerates. This is a nice ability to use against organic and armoured targets. It helps bring down armoured targets really quick, and against organic targets it makes them panic, thus almost giving you a stun type ability. Incinerate, I should say, is a projectile type move, similar to the Adept moves like Throw and that, where it will fly towards a target and they have a chance of rolling out the way like that. You can follow this up with a second Incinerate to try to counteract that, or try to get them in the back or something where they're unaware that the projectile is coming towards them. So the next ability the Human Engineer has is Overload. I love this ability. It is quite useful against almost anyone except maybe the larger targets like Banshees or Atlases. Basically, it can reduce and remove the shields of almost anyone, leaving them open for your teammates to take out, or yourself to take out with your weapons or Incinerate, depending how quick your recharge time is. I should also mention that Overload is a instant cast ability. There is no projectiles. Basically, as soon as you point at someone, just press the Overload button and Overload will hit them instantaneously. Here you see is an example of how quick Overload can take down a barrier, like that, see? Overload can also be used on organics, non-shielded enemies, and it causes them to shock themselves and become stunned. I should also mention Overload has a specific ability as well against synthetics like the Geth, and that it causes more damage on them than it would humans. So basically they are the three main abilities of the Human Engineer. Now, one thing I should mention as a quick tip kind of for the Human Engineer, as well as other classes, is if you can't highlight someone, it does not mean you can't hit them with an ability, as you saw there and here. You see I'm using Overload on people even though they're not necessarily highlighted for me. Just aim your crosshair over them and hit the button and half of the time it will still hit them, as long as they're not moving too quick. So the human engineer has a lot of utilities at its disposal. It can basically reduce shields, barriers with overload, as well as cause damage to synthetics, and it can reduce armor and make organics panic with its Incinerate, and it's even got a distraction in the combat drone. Whilst maybe not as good as the Solarian decoy, it is still a nice little perk to have, having a little combat drone distract people while you take them out with your overload Incinerates and weapons. The human engineer's weapon abilities may not be the best, especially if you haven't specced into Alliance training, but I see it in this way. You are there to take down the shields and armor of people. Your teammates are there to finish off the targets. You are kind of a utility to the team rather than a solo player playing for yourself. With a human engineer in your team, you have pretty much got your anti-barriers, anti-shield, anti-armor class in your team ready to go. Of course, these roles can be fulfilled with other classes that are out there, but the human engineer fulfills almost all of them. The only thing, like I said, it lacks is the sheer damage dealing ability that some of the other classes have with weapons. But this isn't a bad thing. The human engineer is always a nice class to have in your team. Maybe not the best, but it's certainly not a hindrance to any team. I would also advise that if beginners are looking for a class to get into, that they should try the human engineer. It's a nice, easy class to start off with. Having the ability to get rid of shields and armor, attacks for different situations is always good for beginners to the game to learn. So, the human engineer. If I was going for gold mode, there is not much I would change with my spec. The only thing I feel not 100% comfortable about with the human engineer is the combat drone. I would like to experiment a little bit with making the drone a little bit more of a damage dealer than a long-lasting drone. With the tougher enemies, it doesn't distract their attention enough, unfortunately. So summarising the human engineer, it's a great utility class. It covers almost everything you need in a team to be able to complete challenges. It can take down barriers, shields and armor relatively quickly, and it supports the team really well. Give it a try. Hope you enjoyed the video. I've been Darcblade. Subscribe and like for more.